The sides have been drawn in the war against the Daily Wire and Steven Crowder. And there's a lot of good feedback on both sides, and there's a lot of bad feedback on both sides. So we'll look over some of what's going on there, because Crowder has named his adversary in this entire situation. And, well, it's somebody that I've considered adversarial as well, even though I do use their content most of the time in the show. But we'll talk about that and what's happening there and what goes on in the future because of that. It's going to be a good point, and again, we're probably going to spend a lot of time talking about that as well. In other news, we have hit the debt ceiling. That is right. We are officially out of money to pay our bills, except for the fact that the Treasury Department can round up some more money to go and pay our bills. So we'll talk about what's happening there, what this means, and where we go next for that. Southwest pilots call for a vote on striking after their union realized some of the problems that they had with the last shutdown of air travel and the abuse that they took from there. And a cop shooting in Georgia has led to both the officer being in critical but stable condition, the protester being shot and deceased, and counter-protesters calling for violence against the Georgia Police Department that was involved in the shooting. So we'll talk just a bit about that. It is going to be all this and more. I got more votes than Kevin McCarthy. I am Jay Edgar, and this is Contemporary. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Contemporary. We have got a lot to go over here tonight and a lot of this, again, we're not going to be as video heavy as we were last night. Definitely, we were very, very video heavy last night, but definitely we've got a lot to go over, especially with the Crowder and Daily Wire feud, which, by the way, he has named the... Wow, I guess I probably really can't say that on air like my friend Steven does, because his videos get privated on YouTube as soon as he's done with them, because, well, when you've been suspended and blocked and banned as many times as Steven Ignoramus has, I could understand why you would still stream to the platform, but make sure that there's nothing there for people to go back and mass report you over on that same platform. But I do still remember the day, the Kanye thing, which, you know, you guys know I still don't buy the whole Kanye thing, but I remember the day that the Kanye thing dropped and Steven's just out there with wide eyes saying he named the... I guess I don't know what YouTube's policy is on saying that word, so I'm not going to go down that road. But you guys were all... Most of you guys, we share audience on both sides. Most of you guys know what he said. And, I mean, realistically, when you look at top management of the Daily Wire, Steven kind of did that too. Steven Crowder, of course, not Steven Ignoramus, so... I still don't buy the sincerity of Steven Crowder, but with the massive jump to protect themselves that Boring over at the Daily Wire did, I can see where some of this may have some merit as well. So that's what we're going to talk about right after finance. But we are officially past the debt ceiling. We've hit that there have been some measures that give Congress time to go and figure this out, and we'll be talking about that. Hunter Biden actually wrote that he quarantined at the Delaware house with the classified documents, so that'll be an interesting shift. And a famous 90s kids show star is running for Congress. Which one? Well, we'll have news for that at 7. It is going to be all this and more over on Contemporary. Thanks for checking us out over on... I don't do the programs anymore. Thanks for checking us out, though, over on YouTube, DLive, Twitch, Facebook. I have a Facebook fan page, obviously, and most of you know I don't use personal Facebook anymore. I barely go on the fan page. I just post the videos to there and go. But you can catch me on all those great platforms. Come back here and go check out great programming such as The Daily Ignoramus, The Breakdown with Birkenhoff, The R-Rated Conservative, The Porch Boys. Go check out Tweets by Brit and Mr. Behavior and the No Gimmicks podcast as we come together to bring you a better news programming schedule that is from the common man for the common man. That is right. We are looking for a way to bring you news and culture from people who don't wear suits that cost more than your house. People who are sitting sometimes in their living room, sometimes in an office, sometimes in the master bedroom of their house, to bring you news that affects you with decisions that you've had to make before. So go check out all that great programming. With as much as we have to go through, we are going to jump right into it, and we are going to start with the finance this morning. Whoops, wrong scene. And let's have a look at the Dow. The Dow spent its third day in a row down, bringing itself down to third day, because we were closed for Martin Luther King Day, and it did close just up on Friday. But the third day straight down, 33,044.56 points to end the day. That is down 252.4 points, or just about 0.75%, just a little bit over 0.75% actually. So it's still sinking down, and again, I remind you what the investors actually think of you, because one of the big things that's driving this down is the fact that the unemployment numbers were actually good. Now, of course, we look at the fact that a lot of the jobs that are being picked up right now are not necessarily jobs that are going to be holding your head above water for long term, but more and more people are taking some of the lower paying jobs just to keep themselves above water, and well, that knocks them off their unemployment. So those numbers are staying down, and the first time claims are staying down as well, but we'll talk about that as we go into the articles. Looking in at the Bitcoin, which actually went up considerably today. I thought it held steady, but it actually went up considerably today. Another 402.3 US dollars, 1.95% rise to 21,076.50. 21,076 US dollars and 50 US cents is what your Bitcoin is worth per coin. I don't think most of you have a complete coin. I think some of you do. But for those of you who even have a little bit, congratulations, you had another winning day of your Bitcoin. So we'll see what happens with that. Brief overlook on the gas prices in Madison, because we've been watching these pretty much every day since the gas prices dropped to their lowest point all the way back in June of 2020. The gas prices in Madison are holding steady on the day over day. No change. None of the stations change at all. So holding steady. We'll see if there's a rise or a fall as oil prices change. Let's see what IBD has to say for the day. Let's get the live chat up too, by the way. Dave Crosby passed away. I didn't get that on here. We'll probably talk about that tomorrow. Because, David Crosby, even with the controversy, by the way, I guess we won't be reading from IBD. They blocked us out. Let's just close that one out there. Yeah, even with the controversy with Neil Young and then the rest of Crosby, Stills and Nash, I was a very big Crosby, Stills and Nash fan, and sometimes Young too. I guess I'll never get to see them in concert either. All right, let's get into it. I did have one that was archived. We'll talk about finance there. Jobless claims unexpectedly drop to 190,000, lowest level in 4 months. From Megan Henney. The number of Americans filing for unemployment benefits unexpectedly dropped last week, falling to the lowest level in 4 months. Figures released Thursday by the Labor Department show initial claims for the week ended in January 14th to 190,000, from the unrevised 205,000 recorded a week earlier. That is below the 2019 pre-pandemic average of 218,000 claims and matches a low notched in mid-September. Continuing claims filed by Americans who are consecutively receiving unemployment benefits rose slightly to 1.65 million for the week ended in January 7th, an increase of 17,000 from the previous week. 1 year ago, nearly 2.3 million Americans were receiving unemployment benefits. Despite growing evidence of deceleration in the economy and a growing chorus of layoff announcements, it's not yet apparent in jobless claims data, said Jim Baird, the CIO of Plante Morgan Financial Advisors. For now, the data points to a labor market that's grinding ahead against the weight of a slowing demand. The labor market remains a bright spot in the economy, but there are some early signs that it's beginning to soften. The economy added just 223,000 jobs in December. That's the smallest gain in 2 years. A plethora of big tech companies, including Amazon and Microsoft, have also announced thousands of job cuts in recent weeks as they brace for a possible recession. The economy is slowing as the Federal Reserve raises rates at the fastest pace in decades in order to crush runaway inflation. And also your job prospects, many of your household incomes, your ability to buy another house. It's not just runaway inflation they're crushing. They're crushing a lot of things right now. Although the labor market is still healthy, that's a lie. Both the housing and manufacturing sectors are weakening and inflation remains painfully high. Well, yeah, you just spent another $1.7 trillion on debt. Policymakers have already approved 7 straight rate increases in 2022 and have signaled that more hikes are to come this year as they try to cool the economy and the labor market. Fed officials have made it clear that they expect unemployment to climb as a result of higher rates, which could force consumers and businesses to pull back on spending. Updated projections from the central bank's December meeting show that officials expect unemployment to rise to 4.5% by the end of next year, up from the current rate of 3.5%. That could mean more than 1 million Americans lose their jobs between now and the end of 2023. And yes, a reminder, the economists are celebrating this. So that's where we are at on finance for the day. Let's talk Crowder. So a few details coming out off of this. First off, probably approximately when we were on air last night, the perpetrator was named in the contract. Now, as we watched some of the video, we didn't watch the whole video, obviously, last night, but we watched some of the video. And in it, Crowder accused a big name company of offering him a massive amount of money, but with a massive amount of restrictions. Mostly tempering his ability to do the show the way that he wants. Anyway, that was the way that he read into it. Now, just shortly, probably again while we were on air last night, Jeremy Boring took to a live stream to both own up to the fact that yes, that was his contract, and also try to rebut the contract, but basically by saying that he offered him $50 million and he should be damn grateful for the opportunity. And oh, by the way, that was just an initial offer, the $50 million. We could have raised that. I would have been comfortable paying him $100 million. Conditions apply. I can't believe I'm about to say these words, but I'm actually on Steven's side on this. I don't know if Steven himself is legitimate in this, and I said this last night, I still don't know. Because I do think that Steven himself is a controlled oppo. And a lot of what he's doing right now is to try to swallow up and put under contract some of his up-and-coming competitors. A lot of the same way that Daily Wire and Tim Pool's Timcast did. Why do you think they're picking up people like the redheaded libertarian and Ian and Sour Patch Lydia and keeping them under contract for a while so they can't rise up and try to compete against him? There is a game to be played. And I don't necessarily believe that Steven is innocent in all this. But as far as his feud with the Daily Wire, when it's him versus the Wire, I gotta go with Crowder on this one. If it's just the two of them in a vacuum. The Quartering tweeting out, The reason the Daily Wire leaked the $50 million number was because they knew everyone would focus on that and not the big tech stuff, and I've got examples of that as well. Crowder, not once in his video did he complain about the pay. Their reply was very calculated. And yeah, I mean, Jeremy Boring is a good businessman. Myself agreeing with his views aside, which I do not, I will respect the grind and say that he's a very good businessman, and he, especially being around Shapiro, Klavan, and Knowles, and yes, even Walsh, and I don't know anything about Brett Cooper, but with having those four in his corner, yes, he can come out and put a very, very calculated, good sounding speech that makes you feel all warm and fuzzy inside. He can give you a guarantee that you can come back in and put under your pillow, and the guarantee fairy will come back and give you a nickel for it. But as this Jeremy Hambly, very much pointed out, that the calculated response was bullshit. And with that being said, we'll do some math with this as well, but, with the fact that this has been leaked out to the public and we see right now, Hard Bastard tweets out, below is what's at issue with the Crowder versus Daily Wire crap. Doesn't matter if the contract was for $1 or $100 million. This helps the people Daily Wire claims to be fighting. Glad they're being exposed. Conservative Inc. needs to be dismantled, just like corporate media. Now, when you look at this, when you look at the penalties, and again, I mean, this could be $1 billion contract. And when you've got penalties like this, especially with someone like Crowder, who himself is very well known for being kicked off. Like, I couldn't go to this. I've been suspended once, and it's going to cost you big time off something like this. But I just want to go through the numbers here. Now, the penalties. That's the numbers I want to go through. So the ad drop. If Crowder is boycotted or dropped by more than 50% of his then extant advertising partners, that is 50% of the revenue from those partners, and the company is not able to replace them within 90 days, the fee will be reduced by 25% until such time as ad revenue has been restored for a period of 90 days. All right, let's put that into the calculator there. That's 25%. Content strike. If any of the major platforms, YouTube, Facebook, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, issues a content strike, other than a company-wide content strike, such that Crowder content cannot be monetized on such platform, and the company is not able to resolve the issue within 90 days, the fee will be reduced by 25% from that point forward. That's 50. And that's just a strike. Now ban on top of that. Add bans. Bans if Crowder content cannot be released, not monetized, but cannot be released on any of the major platforms. YouTube, Facebook, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify because of Crowder or its content being banned from those platforms. The fee will be reduced by 20% if on YouTube, 20% if on Apple Podcasts, Facebook, 10%, Spotify, 10%. So 20 and 20 is 40. Plus 10 is 50, plus 10 is 60, plus the other 50% that we already took from a strike and an ad drop, both of which would be in play at the same time, tells me that if there was a major flagging rate, now, he would probably only drop down to 100%, because with Spotify actually standing by the creators after the Rogan thing, it would be unlikely that Spotify would screw with Crowder. But even, let's just say that a massive flagging rate came in, and we know that our friends to the left love to do that and work together in massive flagging rates to do this. That's 110% of your income gone. And you get 3 months to watch it all go by and still work for this. And if you lose 100% of a dollar contract, you lose a dollar. If you lose 100% of a 50 million contract, you lose $50 million. Although, of course, this is his monthly stipend because, as Jeremy pointed out when he was doing his rebuttal, that this goes into effect and, this goes against the stipends, not necessarily the full contract. I do question whether or not, and this would be a question for a lawyer, especially in Texas where the contract would be drawn up, as to whether or not he would be forced and owe the 10% over on the 100%. Because I don't know the answer to that question. I don't. And that's people that, by the way, he can't pay then. Jeremy was very, very clear when he saw the $50 million, or put the $50 million number out. And he talked about Crowder's ability and his preference to go and have his own people do his own thing. Like, Steven wouldn't be taking Daily Wire people to do this. Steven would be having his own producers, his own sound guys, his own people in studio, and everybody else on the back burner. But he'd be paying them out of the $50 million contract, which comes out to be just a little bit over $1 million a month. That's his operating budget on top of it. And on top of everything else that he would be bringing in and putting in his pocket. Or I'm sorry, out of what he's bringing in and putting in his pocket out of that, just a little bit over $1 million a month. First, that's going to be taxed to all hell because that's income. But then number two, that turns around and, that's his operating costs, his cameras, his lights, his staff, etc. All those people who, if there is a massive flagging raid and you lose, let's leave Spotify out and you lose 100% of your revenue because the flagging rate put out there, you got the strikes, the ad drops, and all the platforms dropped you at once. And he's got a fairly sizable crew. That's a lot of people that aren't getting paid right now. So again, whether or not I think that he's grifting to come back out and try to put his competition under contract, which I do think is an aspect of the route that Steven's going with this. In spite of that, if again, in just a vacuum between the two of them, I gotta take Steven's side off this one. But as pointed out by Hambly, the quartering, when we look in at what Miss Fedesi had to say, which I enjoy Bridget's programming, I really do. Will Summer tweets out, there's a big feud breaking out tonight between two of the biggest names in right-wing media. It pits Steven Crowder against Ben Shapiro's Daily Wire, all over a $50 million offer for Crowder that he found so offensive he leaked the terms of the offer. With Bridget Fedesi coming out here and completely, again, missing the point, just like Jeremy Hambly pointed out. People can't afford eggs, and a man of the people Crowder is calling $50 million slave wages? None of your favorite freedom fighters give a crap about you. Wake up, sheeple. You can be so wrong in a tweet and still be so right at the end, which again, don't get me wrong. The second sentence of this tweet, Bridget's absolutely correct. None of your favorite freedom fighters care about you. Unless, of course, I'm your favorite freedom fighter. Because I do care about you. I've actually sat down and talked with you guys individually. We're a small channel right now, so I can still do that and care about you guys. But, the bigger names. Steven, Shapiro, Beck, Boring, Tucker, they don't care about you. Matt is, I think, probably a little bit on the edge. And I do think he does care about some of his fans. Hell, he married one of them. But yeah, there's a little bit of off of that. Now I've got two selections I want to play out of Jeremy's video, which I've got the first one queued up, and then we will move on to the 32-minute mark and basically listen to Jeremy start ripping into somebody who he claims to be a friend. But I wanted to just touch on some of the rebuttal to this, and then we will get into the debt ceiling news. So let's grab a couple minutes from up here. We'll grab a couple minutes off of this, and we'll be done with this topic.
And then E, additional Crowder content. What is this? I don't know, but presumably over the next 4 to 6 years, we might come up with other things that either he wants to do or we want to do. So we built a sort of catch-all bucket. If we and Crowder mutually agree to create additional content not currently contemplated, then we'd pay him $15,000 a day for that shoot. And again, a lot of that would be days he was already shooting, so that's just a little extra money in his pocket if we do something extra. Item 6, the back catalog. Crowder will license his entire back catalog, including without limitation every past episode of Louder with Crowder, to us during the term. That just means that all the episodes that already exist would also be behind our paywall during the term. At the end of the term, all of that content that we didn't actually pay for would revert to Crowder at the end of the term.
And that's the part that I've drawn the biggest problem with this. I sat down and I listened to the whole thing, front to back, start to finish. And this was the part that I actually drew a problem with. Now, this is why I won't go to one of these companies. Jeremy could come back out and offer me a $50 million contract right now, and I would shove that back in his face too. And I'm not coming from a position that Steven is. I want to put that out very clear. $50 million for me is life-changing money. And boy, oh boy, could I use that. But to look at this, and when it comes to content, one of the important things to point out with that is the back catalog. I have made it point blank clear when, my former business partner, Jake, of Freedom Scoop, when he was trying to grow the channel, before he got hired on the RNC, when he was trying to grow the news network and the channel, his first insistence to me was, okay, once we get started here and we start pulling subscriptions, I need you to go ahead right away and we'll get we'll get some of your content right there and we'll put it up behind the paywall so only people can see it. The people can only see it if they pay for it. And I said, no, we're not doing that, Jake. I'm going to tell you that right off the bat. We are not doing that. I want people, especially if I grow into be a bigger content creator, I want people to be able to take my videos, critique them, cut them up, use clips of them, in order to either rebut, agree, or argue with me. And I don't want them to have to go pay Jeremy Boring to do that. I don't want them to have to pay me to do that. I want my content. My content will always be free, no matter what. If I want to entice you to pay, I will find other ways to do that. Private chats, private hangouts, etc. But my base content will always be 100% free to the end user. That right there would have nullified the contract for me. As soon as I saw that, I'd torn it up and put it back in front of Jeremy and said no. I don't care how many zeros you put behind that contract. My content will always be free. 100%. I could become the next Tucker Carlson and I will never charge you for my content, ever. But I also want to take this from the 32-minute mark.
Our resources are limited because we're trying to accomplish so much for our values, for our movement. So we pay for that out of our dollar, and then we pay ourselves. But that's how it works. I said, if the next day one of the dollars, the ad dollar, goes away, now what happens? Should it be that you said something on your show that caused that $1 to go away? Now you keep your $1 and we make zero? I said, that wouldn't make any sense. Obviously, you would have to lose a little and we would have to lose a little. I said, we're trying to sort of emulate the idea of a joint venture. And Stephen said, no, you should lose all the money. It's your business. And I said, well, Stephen, how would we have a business? Why would we be in business? And how would we stay in business? And Stephen, this is a very important point. Stephen, again, I think the most entertaining, talented person in the conservative movement. I think one of the most entertaining and talented people in entertainment generally in the country today, has created a very successful content generation company, a very successful production company. But Stephen's never had to create the company that actually distributes, markets, and monetizes all of that content. He talks in his video about being one of the only true independent conservative voices. And I find that incredibly offensive. Stephen, the whole time I've known him, has worked for someone else, has been paid by someone else. That doesn't mean other people tell him what to say. He's a very independent voice, and that's good. So is Matt Walsh. So is Candace Owens. So is Ben Shapiro. So is Michael Knowles. So is...
Yeah, that is a load of crap. And that's, again, this is what business does to people, too. And, again, where I want to go with... Because I advertise media at the beginning. All the people that I think you should watch because they're all invited to come and join the media network that I want to build. But I could never sit down and treat Britt or Stephen Ignoramus or any of the Porch Boys guys like this on a live video and still call them my friends. And Jeremy does at the very end of this video, and I'm not going to skip to the end of this video to come back out and say, well, I still think that Stephen's a friend. I love Stephen. Stephen's a great guy, but, he says he's independent. He's always worked for somebody. This is full defense mode because they got caught. All right. I'm done with my rant. And I know that Grant had to go away because this was Crowder, but I guess for me, this was actually a very important segment to this because there is a business model that I want to go to. This is something that I want to do. And as far as content creation goes, again, I could take that money, the kind of money that they probably wouldn't pay me $50 million because I wouldn't be bringing over an audience the size of Crowder's, obviously. But even like Ron Helton said in the chat, $100,000 would be life-changing money. And they could probably throw that at me and afford it and be comfortable with it. And I could get all that money to use for advertising budget. But to what extent? Every one of my past videos is now hidden behind a paywall, and you guys can't go back and see that and see where I came from. You see where I'm going with that? So that's where we're at with that. Let's talk about the debt ceiling. All right. From CNN, U.S. hits its debt ceiling, prompting Treasury to take extraordinary measures. From Tammy Luby, that's it. That's right. We're officially there. It's done. The U.S. hit its debt ceiling set by Congress on Thursday, forcing the Treasury Department to start taking extraordinary measures to keep the government from paying its bills and escalating pressure on Capitol Hill to avoid a catastrophic default. Now, I hate to tell you this, but the time to start taking extraordinary measures was not when you hit the debt ceiling. The time to start taking extraordinary measures was the day that you raised the debt ceiling to $31.4 trillion, knowing full well that you would hit it again. That was the day to start taking extraordinary measures. The battle lines for the high-stakes fight have already been set. Hardline Republicans, who have enormous sway in the House because of the party's slim majority, have demanded that lifting the borrowing cap can be tied to spending reductions. The White House countered that it will not offer any concessions or negotiate on raising the debt ceiling. So, again, I remind you that Republicans, even hardline Republicans, have said, okay, we'll give you what you want, but you have to give us some of what we want. And the White House countered by saying, no, give us what we want and screw off. And yet this entire thing is still going to be blamed on Republicans. And with the solution to the debt ceiling drama squarely in lawmakers' hands, no, it's not. Fears are growing that the partisan brinksmanship could result in the nation defaulting on its debt for the first time ever, or coming dangerously close to doing so. No. That is a lie, CNN. That is a bold-faced lie. Do you know why? Because there is a shared responsibility. And honestly, if you want to put something squarely on one party, the default and the solution to the debt is in the White House's hands, because Joe, being the de facto leader of his party, however much of a steward that he is, has the responsibility to come out and say, okay, we want the debt ceiling raised, and they want some spending cuts. Where can we find ourselves in the middle here somewhere? It is Joe Biden saying that he will not even consider negotiation right now. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen wrote a letter to McCarthy Thursday informing him the nation's outstanding debt is at its statutory limit of $31.4 trillion and that the agency will implement extraordinary measures so it doesn't default on the debt. Which would have enormous consequences on the U.S. economy, global financial stability, and many Americans. She said the measures would last through June 5th. This buys Congress some time, but how long the extraordinary measures can last is subject to considerable uncertainty, she wrote, stressing that it's a challenge to forecast how many financial obligations the federal government must pay and how much revenue it will take in months into the future. I respectfully urge Congress to act promptly to protect the full faith and credit of the U.S., she wrote. The announcement follows the warning Yellen sent last week about the approaching debt limit and the temporary band-aid of the extraordinary measures. I believe you're talking about Fleckus, by the way, Ron. Fleckus talks. But her missive has failed to spark bipartisan discussion so far. Instead, both Republicans and Democrats reaffirmed their rigid positions over the past week. How is it a rigid position when one side is coming into this saying, okay, we'll let you have what you want, just give us a little bit of what we want? How is that a rigid position? That's not a rigid position. Both sides are not in a rigid position. You're just paid to say that because you're a propaganda arm of the Democrat Party. National Economic Council Director Brian Deese on Thursday repeatedly called on Congress to meet the U.S. obligations by raising the debt limit, warning against economic chaos that could ensue should Congress fail to do so. This is about economic stability versus economic chaos, Deese told Caitlin Collins on CNN this morning, calling it Congress's basic fundamental obligation. He added, even just the specter the U.S. might not honor its obligations does damage to the economy. McCarthy must walk a fine line since any member can call for a motion to vacate the Speaker's chair, one of the several concessions he made to gain the top post after 15 rounds of voting earlier this month. For now, he's leaning on the debt ceiling crisis to cut spending and balance the U.S. budget. On Tuesday, McCarthy rejected Democratic calls for a clean debt ceiling increase without any conditions attached, something Congress has done time and again, including under then-President Trump, because of course it's CNN and they have to bring that name into it. And by the way, I will remind you, when they suspended the debt ceiling under Trump, I told them that was a bad idea too. The Speaker told reporters on Capitol Hill that Biden admin should begin to negotiate ahead of this summer when the U.S. could default. Why wouldn't we sit down and change this behavior so we wouldn't put ourselves on a more fiscally strong position, McCarthy said. Biden and McCarthy have not yet spoken Thursday about the debt limit, according to an official familiar with the dynamic. Unnamed source, of course. Far right GOP Rep. Andy Biggs went even further in a tweet on Tuesday, writing, "We cannot raise the debt ceiling. Democrats have carelessly spent our taxpayer money and devalued our currency. They made their bed, so they must lie in it." The White House on Wednesday blasted the Arizona Republicans' stunning and unacceptable position and once again rejected calls to reduce spending as part of its debt ceiling deal. You know what? This sounds an awful lot like this is the White House's problem, not congressional Republicans' problem. Mitch McConnell, meanwhile, sought to reassure Americans that an agreement eventually will be reached with the Biden admin. He stressed the U.S. must never default on its debt and never will. "No, I'm not concerned about the financial crisis," he said at an event in Louisville on Thursday, noting that, dealing with the borrowing cap is always a rather contentious effort. The debt ceiling, which is the maximum amount a federal government is able to borrow to finance obligations, the lawmakers and presidents have already approved was last raised December of 2021. Created more than a century ago, it's become a way for Congress to restrict the growth of borrowing, turning it into a political football in recent decades. Increasing the cap does not authorize new spending commitments. But it kinda does. So, yep, we are there. And the arguments coming out of Congress are about to get real interesting. And so is the propaganda from your favorite page shills, like Jersey, My Wife's Son Reliant, and JoJo from Joy's, and Jeff Tiedrick and the Palmer Report, and all those other fun people. ABC coming out with a video saying what happens after the US officially hits its debt ceiling. Warning, this is going to be mostly propaganda, but we'll watch a couple minutes of it. 6-minute video. We won't do all 6 minutes of it, I can say that. But let's see what it is they have to say.
Let's try and break it all down, make sense of the numbers and the money. ABC's Elizabeth Schulze and ABC News business correspondent Alexis Christoforous. All right, Elizabeth, let's first start with the White House and just trying to reach a deal here, and if you think it's even possible at this point.
Look here, the White House says that it's trying to reach out to lawmakers from both sides of the aisle to come to a bipartisan agreement to either suspend or raise that $31 trillion debt limit. That would mean that the government can keep borrowing money, can stop with the risk of a default, can keep paying all of the obligations that it needs. And we're talking about obligations, important to remember. We're talking about payments for Social Security, for Medicare. These are day-to-day payments that the government has already committed to. These are bills it already owes. But the White House is saying it's not willing to compromise to the point that it's going to attach any sort of other spending cuts to this agreement. And basically, that's what Republicans want. They say that they're not going to raise that limit until there are also an agreement in Congress to cut spending, to cut the government's expenses. So both sides really digging in here. Neither side so far showing that they're willing to compromise. So there's this game of chicken going on, and it is pretty, the stakes are pretty high here when we're talking about what's at stake.
Yeah, indeed. And Alexis, the U.S., reached its borrowing limit today. The Treasury Department says it's taking extraordinary measures. Let's just talk more about what exactly that means and what it means for everyday Americans.
It means that the government has to get pretty creative now in order to pay the bills. Elizabeth ticked off a few of those things: Social Security payments, also our tax refunds, if we want those on time. That's another bill the government owes. Also, if anybody holds Treasury debt, bondholders, they're due money as well. So the government has to find the money elsewhere, get creative, and sort of move things around, if you will, very much the way you would do in your old household budget. If you couldn't pay a bill, you'd have to take money from someplace else in the budget to pay. So just a few examples of these extraordinary measures. The Treasury is not going to make any new investments for the time being in 2 government retiree funds for pensions and health care. They're also going to suspend reinvestments in something called the G Fund, and that's a federal employee retirement fund. We should note, though, those retirement investments will be put back into those funds once the debt ceiling is raised. But again, this is not a long-term solution. It really kicks the can down the road until about June, when the government is going to have to stop playing politics and come up with a real solution here, where the U.S. will default on its debt for the first time in history. Also want to mention, if you were wondering whether or not the...
I find it very interesting that the accusation about the fact that the debt ceiling has been reached and now the Treasury Department is cutting spending that they will go back and spend as soon as the debt ceiling is raised again, is kicking the can down the road, when, let's be completely realistic, raising the debt ceiling again is kicking the can down the road. They're not solving the problem of why we keep going into so much more debt. They're kicking the can down the road. Did anybody catch that other than me? I caught that right away. Let's grab one from the Associated Press. A little bit of what they were talking about in the article here. U.S. Treasury buys time for Biden and GOP on debt limit deal. From Josh Boak. The U.S. government bumped up against its debt limit Thursday, prompting the Treasury Department to take extraordinary accounting steps to avoid default, as friction between Biden and Republicans raised concerns about whether the U.S. can sidestep an economic crisis. The Treasury Department said in a letter to congressional leaders it had started taking extraordinary measures as the government had run up against its legal borrowing capacity of $31.381 trillion. An artificially imposed cap, the debt ceiling has been increased roughly 80 times since the 60s. I respectfully urge Congress to act promptly to protect the full faith and credit of the U.S. Janet Yellen wrote in a letter. So, again, mostly review off of this. Do they actually? Okay, here we go. In order to keep the government open, the Treasury on Thursday was making a series of accounting maneuvers that would put on hold contributions and investments redemptions for government workers' retirement and healthcare funds, giving the government enough financial space to handle its day-to-day expenses until roughly June. That right there should be a conversation about just how much the government spends. Of course, we're not going to criticize the fact that they're spending money on people who have worked for them. But the fact that you can put just the contribution into the general fund on hold, and that lets you spend the amount of money that you have racked up in outstanding obligations rather, for 6 whole months, tells me we really gotta cut a lot of this down. And there are way too many workers in the federal government. That's the other thing. There are way too many workers in the federal government. What happens if these measures are exhausted without a debt limit deal is unknown. A prolonged default could be devastating, with crashing markets and panic-driven layoffs if confidence evaporated in a cornerstone of the global economy at the U.S. Treasury. Analysts at Bank of America cautioned in a report last week that there is a high degree of uncertainty about the speed and magnitude of the damage the U.S. economy would incur. The underlying challenge is that the government would have to balance its books on a daily basis if it lacks the ability to issue debt. Okay, what's the problem with that? Now again, I consider that to be a rational solution, and we don't have time for rational solutions. But what's the problem with making that the long-term goal? Again, obviously, with this happening right now and never having a discussion about this before, I understand and accept the fact that this is not a short-term solution. You have a lot of money passing through the federal government. To figure that part out in 6 months. But hey, can we actually have a plan out here so we can figure it out within, let's say, a half a decade, let's say 5 years? A long-term solution. Still, if past debt ceiling showdowns, such as the one that occurred in 2011, are any guide, Washington may be in a nervous state of suspended animation, with little progress until the X date, the deadline when the Treasury's extraordinary measures are depleted. Unlike the 2011 showdown, the Federal Reserve is actively raising interest rates to lower inflation and is rolling off its own holdings of U.S. debt, meaning that recession fears are already elevated among consumers, businesses, and investors. And the funniest part is, and I called this long ago, is that the Biden White House, between its excessive spending, COVID measures, and this, are going to tank the economy completely. And they're going to blame Republicans for it. So that's where we're at. I've got an op-ed for you, and with an exchange I had on Twitter earlier on this week, I do want to point out the fact that yes, I do use op-eds in this program, but I make it very, very clear that this is not direct journalism. I had a guy he got a bunch of Wisconsin publications that all said that Ron Johnson was a criminal, and every single article that he produced said op-ed and commentary clearly on it. But he was taking them as actual journalism. So again, I will remind you, this is an op-ed. The opinions expressed in this article are not necessarily the opinions of Politico, Turns of Pages Productions, Contemporary, or your host, Jay Edgar. But coming from Politico, the McCarthy holdouts may come to regret the deal that they made. From John Fury. It's easy to promise to fix Congress. It's a lot harder to do so. I've seen it firsthand. Like many of the Speaker of the House before him, Kevin McCarthy is stuck between promising certain policy outcomes on one hand and promising a fair and open process on the other. Some of the most conservative members of the Republican conference demanded, reportedly in exchange for their votes for Speaker, that McCarthy do two things simultaneously. Cut spending dramatically while opening up the political process to allow for a return to what's known as Congress as regular order, where rank-and-file members, not just leadership, have a say in crafting legislation, but McCarthy will struggle to satisfy both aims, particularly when it comes to raising the debt ceiling. The frustration among all members of the House about a broken process where huge omnibus spending bills are negotiated behind closed doors and then voted on in the middle of the night is totally understandable. It has also been a complaint from just about every backbencher in congressional history. The process, of course, has gone seriously off the rails in the last couple of decades in Congress, culminating in the Nancy Pelosi years. The former Speaker had little interest in a fair process and was more willing to trample on the rights of the House minority. When I was a senior aide to then-Speaker Denny Hastert, the so-called accidental speaker who picked up the reins in '99 after Gingrich's stormy leadership came to an abrupt end, we promised to deliver regular order. What regular order meant back then was a devotion to a predictable, repeatable, democratic, and orderly process. It relied on the authorizing committees to do their authorizing, the Budget Committee to do its budgeting, and the Taxing Committee to do its taxing, and the Spending Committee to do the spending. We promised to give members back their power to make decisions and outline a clear agenda that promised to secure America's future. Hastert had deep personal failings, but he was an effective leader on Capitol Hill because he promised to be a listener more than a speaker. And he was rewarded by his colleagues by becoming the longest Republican speaker in of the House in history. I want to talk more about what it is that they say they'll regret. I appreciate the sentiments of the small band of rebels who demanded that McCarthy give them a bigger say in the legislative process, and I appreciate that they're using all their leverage to extract concessions before they gave him the vote as Speaker. But they need to understand that regular order doesn't necessarily mean that conservatives will get the results that they want. And they need to ask themselves a question. What is it that they want? Well, they want to cut in spending. Do they want an open process where they can win debate points but perhaps lose amendment votes, or do they want to tilt the process in their favor, stifle debate, and hopefully get enough moderates to come their way in a House that has historically tight margins? They want a spending cut because the people that elected them want a spending cut. It's rare that a member of Congress who loses his or her seat when it comes to extending the debt limit. Voters simply don't care about the esoteric parliamentary debates that revolve around absurd fiscal irresponsibility. But that doesn't mean that political campaigns don't try to make hay out of the debt limit, especially for Republicans. It's a hard vote to swallow. GOP lawmakers don't like out-of-control spending, and they get frustrated when they seemingly can't do anything about it. Yeah, I don't see a regret here, and that's the issue that I see with this. I mean, they're going to come back and try to say that, yes, this is going to be this big regret for them, and they'll all lose their seats because of it. That risk was always there. Anytime you step into the House as a Republican, you stand an outsized risk of being a one-term lawmaker, especially in today's propagandistic climate. All right, so that's where we're at on the debt ceiling. We'll probably be watching this. This will probably become top news in very short order as the pressure kicks for the next 6 months. Let's talk about Dobbs. From CNN Politics. Supreme Court issues report on Dobbs leak, but says it has not identified the leaker. From Ariane DeVoe, Tierney Sneed, and Devon Cole. The Supreme Court issued an investigative report on Thursday announcing that it is yet to determine who leaked the draft opinion, overturning Roe to the media last year, but at least 90 people have access to the document at one point. In a statement, the court said the investigative team has to date been unable to identify a person responsible for by preponderance of the evidence. It's also unlikely the leak resulted from a computer hack, the statement said. Investigators said they conducted 126 formal interviews of 97 employees, all of whom denied disclosing the opinion. They also conducted a fingerprint analysis, looked closely into any connections between the employees and reporters, and especially scrutinized any contacts with anyone associated with Politico. Dozens of people had access to the draft, the report states, adding that a few employees admitted to telling their spouses about the draft opinion or the vote counts of the justices. While the report notes that violated the court's confidentiality rules, it does not say whether that led to further investigation or disciplinary action. Long story short, they don't know. TLDR. They don't know. And I do have a Hill article here that we're probably not going to read in full perpetuity, but I wanted to put this here. So, and I don't put this in the Discord before. I put this in the Discord during the show. You guys can go pop in the Discord. It'll be in general chat. And the Hill has the 23-page report, if you guys want to go back and read that. I'll be reading that later on tonight, because I'm interested to see what it is that they got. But long story short, again, they found nothing. Southwest, coming back in the news. From CNN, Southwest Pilots Union cites Christmas meltdown in a call for a strike vote. From Greg Wallace. The union, representing Southwest Airlines pilots, is taking early steps towards a possible strike, citing the airline's Christmas travel meltdown among the concerns. 3 years in the negotiating room with very little progress, a Christmas meltdown that has just defined what all of our problems are, have led us to this decision, Casey Murray, a Southwest captain and president of the Southwest Airlines Pilots Association, said. The union is calling for a strike authorization vote with an early step towards a possible strike. It said the vote could begin in May, a timeline that would give our customers time to book elsewhere so that they may have confidence in their summer vacations, honeymoons, and family outings. The union's vice president, Michael Santoro, called it a tool to wake up management. Still, there's little chance of a strike anytime soon. Airline employees work under the Railway Labor Act, a different labor law than the one that controls contract negotiations that most businesses. That law imposes strict restrictions on when airline employees are allowed to strike. Well, that's because they're de facto government employees. Under the law, a strike typically can't start until 90 days after a government agency, known as the National Mediation Board, declares that the two sides are at an impasse. Even at the end of that 90-day period, a vote from Congress can impose a contract on the two sides and block a strike. Yes, the Democrat Party, the party of the working people and the union people, can pass a law and force you to go to work. As happened in the nation's freight railroads in December. The union also said it's asking Southwest for a gratitude pay to compensate our pilots who suffered through the meltdown. So, well, I hope that you're not planning on flying Southwest anytime soon, because it may become nigh impossible. Some good news coming out of Congress. House Speaker McCarthy has officially ended proxy voting. From Chris Pandolfo. House Republicans have officially ended the practice of proxy voting, which was established during the Pinko Pox pandemic to permit lawmakers to vote without being present in person. No more proxy voting, House Speaker McCarthy announced Thursday. Effective immediately, members of Congress have to show up to work if they want their vote to count. Based Proxy voting was established by former Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi in May of 2020 to allow Congress to operate under the Pinko-Pox pandemic protocols. Instead of showing up for votes, members of Congress could submit a letter to have a colleague announce their position on bills and amendments, and even cast votes in their name. Republicans have argued this policy enabled abuse and permitted legislators to neglect their responsibilities, though many lawmakers took advantage of proxy voting in the last Congress. Yeah, that is a problem, and you shouldn't have done that. But I mean, it's the same idea of all the people out there who tell you that if you think taxation is theft, which it is, then you should never be allowed to drive on a road again. Bitch, I paid for those roads. The ones that already exist. Yes, it got extorted from me, but I still paid for those. I will use them at my leisure. And that doesn't mean I can't advocate to stop the excessive overtaxation of future generations. In 2020, 160 Republicans signed onto the lawsuit brought by McCarthy challenging the practice that was rejected by the Supreme Court. But by the end of 21, roughly 70% of the original Republican plaintiffs had voted by proxy, according to a study by the Brookings Institute. Again, even if you don't agree with the rule, if the ability is there, why not use it? Now, as far as realism, and I said this at the time, for what it is the government was trying to impose on us at the time with the Pinko-Pox, proxy voting was a good idea. All the dinosaurs in Congress were, as far as we knew at the time, extremely susceptible to the commie coof. And as much as as much as I'm against the government, I don't want to see people die over something like this. So, yeah, it was working at the time, but it's just like Title 42, where, okay, now the crisis is over, let's all get back to business as usual and get all these people into the House so they can debate, discuss, and even bring things to the floor to debate. Well, everyone there is present rather than just yes or no votes that go without debate. Let's get these people in here. Let's get these speeches. Be Congress people. Don't be professional campaigners. I think this is a good thing. I've got one here from Axios. McCarthy's risky weapon in the 118th, from Steph W. Knight and Andrew Solender. House Republicans hope a strict new voting schedule will help their slim majority, as only a handful of missed votes could change the game. Why it matters: sickness, surgeries, funerals, and other events calling House members away from D.C. will have higher stakes than ever with historically tight margins and no more proxy voting. The significance of empty seats in the chamber was on full display during the speakership vote. Ken Buck flew back to D.C. after having a medical procedure to ensure McCarthy's speaker victory. Wesley Hunt left a premature newborn son in order to cast his final vote. While Speaker Pelosi was also presided over perilously thin margins, members have been able to cast votes from home due to the pandemic. Republicans ended that option upon taking the majority. So, and of course, this is going to be the point where Axios tries to guilt trip the Republicans and say they're evil. They just want they want Congress people to be in there and be slaves and be there all the time. Well, that's kind of what we voted them there for, is to be there and do their jobs all the time. But the other side of this, when they say this is a risky proposal for McCarthy. McCarthy is the Speaker of the House. Who schedules the votes? Who decides what comes to the floor and when? That would be one Kevin Richard McCarthy. Schedules what comes to the floor and when. Now, if he was waiting until several of his Democrat colleagues were out and just suddenly doing a surprise vote on the floor, I'd call him for that, because that's crap. Make some reasonable obligations and put the schedule out there clearly so everyone can be there at the right time. Barring a major emergency, obviously. But who schedules the votes? Seriously. Let's do some document stuff. Biden classified document investigation. Secret Service ready to provide Delaware visitors, source says. Unnamed, probably. From David Spunt and Timothy H.J. Narazi. The U.S. Secret Service is prepared to offer names of individuals who visited President Biden's Wilmington home if requested by Congress, Fox News has learned. Oh, what do you want to bet this is going to be another thing where Jersey, my wife's unreliant, is out there screaming of the fact that the Secret Service is compromised and they become a Republican arm of the government. Mazel tov, Luke Wee. The White House continues to insist that there exists no formal visitor log for the personal residence where 2 troves of classified documents were found. Considering I think the Secret Service, and I don't know this for sure, but I'm pretty positive the Secret Service has to vet everybody who's coming to see the sitting leader of the free world. I bet you they got some sort of record somewhere. While the White House has not kept a formal list, the Secret Service does collect information on guests with regular access to the home. There it is. Retention of the names of those vetted by the Secret Service depends on the variety of factors, including proximity to the president and the nature of the background check. The Secret Service does not maintain visitor logs at the private residencies of protectees, said the U.S. Secret Service Chief of Communications, Anthony Guglielmi. While the Secret Service does generate law enforcement and criminal justice information records for various individuals who may come into contact with Secret Service protected sites, we are not able to comment further as this speaks to the means and methods of our protective operations. A source familiar with the situation told Fox that Secret Service is prepared to provide available background information on vetted guests to Biden's residence if requested by Congress. Well, we'll watch and see. I don't know where this is going to go. Hunter got into the news with this as well. Hunter Biden wrote that he quarantined at Delaware house where classified documents were stored. From Victor Nava. Hunter Biden recalled in his 2021 memoir that he was quarantined for days inside his father's Wilmington, Delaware mansion, where classified documents from Biden's time as vice president were being improperly stored. In Beautiful Things, Biden's formerly crack-addicted son described spending 4 days inside his father's 6,850 square foot residence with other family members as they awaited the results of the 2020 presidential election. You would have loved the scene on election night, even though the night would have driven you nuts, not least because the vote counting dragged on for days, Hunter wrote in the book's epilogue. Yet one of the benefits of waiting so long for the race to be called was that we all waited it out together at Mom and Dad's house. Melissa and the baby, my girls, Natalie and Hunter, Ashley and Howard, he continued, more than waiting together. We were also quarantined together. There was no escaping one another. So, the New York Post is posting this out as news. But I don't know that this is really actually massive news, except for the fact that the documents were there with people who may not have security clearance having access to them. I mean, Hunter was at his dad's house. Okay. But that's what they have for that. Greta Thunberg. Davos 2023. Greta Thunberg says Davos elite are prioritizing greed and short-term profits over people on the planet. From Sam Meredith. Swedish activist Greta Thunberg on Thursday accused the political and business elite at the World Economic Forum in Davos of prioritizing self-interest and short-term profits over the people and the planet. We are right now in Davos, where basically the people who are mostly fueling the destruction of the planet, the people who are at the very core of the climate crisis, the people who are investing in fossil fuels, etc., etc., and yet somehow these are people that we seem to rely on solving our problems. They've proven time and again that they're not prioritizing that. They're prioritizing self-greed, corporate greed, and short-term economic profits above people and above planet. These people are going to go as far as they possibly can, as long as they can get away with it. They will continue to invest in fossil fuels. They will continue to throw people under the bus for their own gain. Thunberg said it was an absurd situation that the world seems to be listening to Davos delegates rather than those on the front lines of the climate emergency. The 20-year-old was in a staged photo op showing her being arrested earlier this week after being detained alongside other climate activists for protesting the expansion of a coal mine in the tiny village of Lützerath in Germany. Yeah, who would have thought that a bunch of rich people who all flew over to Switzerland in their private jets to come and lecture you on climate change might not pass the smell test for somebody, even somebody who herself is controlled oppo. Pretty weird, right? Something I teased at the beginning. From ABC News, of all people, Ben Savage is considering a run for Adam Schiff's California House seat, Rep says. From Hannah Demisi, with a video by Will Linendahl. I'm going to refresh this because, yeah, we might have to do this right from the beginning. Actor Ben Savage is considering another run for political office. Another run? I didn't know he did it before. According to the FEC documents submitted on Wednesday, the former Boy Meets World star has registered to run as a Democrat in California's 30th congressional district. Well, I hope he's going to run as a Democrat. He can't win as anything else in that district. Oops. Bump the mic again. A rep for Savage told ABC News in a statement, despite the filing, that he is focused on his upcoming wedding. Ben is still making decisions and is always looking for opportunities to give back and serve the community. Earlier this month, Savage announced he is engaged to Tessa Angermeyer, who I have no idea who that is. Savage's representative did not respond to follow-up questions about why he submitted campaign paperwork now. The 30th district seat is currently held by longtime Democratic Rep Adam Schiff, who is seen as a potential candidate to succeed Dianne Feinstein, though she hasn't yet said whether or not she'll seek re-election. If Savage does make a run for Congress, it wouldn't be his first campaign to hold office. He ran unsuccessfully to be the West Hollywood City Council in the 2022 election, focusing on community safety, housing, and homelessness, according to his website. A spokesperson for Schiff said the congressman would not weigh in on Savage potentially seeking his seat. Well, that would be interesting, wouldn't it? Why not the Wonder Years kid? Why his brother? I don't know. Here's a little bit of stupidity for you. From The Blaze, Path Towards Atonement. Dem lawmakers want to force students to commemorate January 6th with a day of observance. From Chris Enlow. Excuse me. Pennsylvania Democrats want school children to observe a day of commemorating the January 6th riot at the U.S. Capitol. 3 Dem lawmakers, Art Haywood and Chris Rabb and Ed Nielsen, are promising to introduce legislation that would force students in the Keystone State to observe 1/6 day. Last week, Rabb teased the bill, according to Center Square, and said it puts Pennsylvanians on the path towards atonement. I'm going to tell you right off the bat, the left needs January 6th. This legislation is about embracing the truth and being a country that is actively engaging in fighting the systems of oppression, Rabb said. This moment demands reconciliation with a clear-eyed and honest assessment of what it will take to get back on the path towards atonement and healing that we so desperately need. In a memorandum to state lawmakers last month, Haywood urged them to support his forthcoming bill using the language typically reserved for honoring fallen military servicemen. The current makeup of the Pennsylvania legislature means any legislation to force observance of January 6th will not become law. But again, they need this. They need January 6th. Their narrative falls apart without it. The old joke is that for Republicans, every day is July the 4th, and for Democrats, every day is April 15th, tax day. But I think that has changed right now. For Democrats now, every day is January 6th. It's always an insurrection, and anybody who disagrees with me is an insurrectionist. From ABC 7, KOAT, out of Albuquerque. I'm going to switch these actually. From CBS News first, Alec Baldwin faces involuntary manslaughter charge over fatal Rust shooting. Actor and producer Alec Baldwin is being charged with involuntary manslaughter in the deadly 2021 shooting on the Western film set Rust. Prosecutors in New Mexico announced Thursday the armorer who oversaw the firearms on the set, Hannah Gutierrez-Reed, is also being charged with involuntary manslaughter. After 15 months, Baldwin was holding a gun during a rehearsal when it discharged, killing cinematographer Helena Hutchins. After a thorough review of the evidence and the laws of the state of New Mexico, I've determined there is sufficient evidence to file criminal charges against Alec Baldwin and other members of the Rust film crew. DA Mary Carmack Altwies said in a statement released Thursday morning, "On my watch, no one is above the law and everyone deserves justice." After 15 months. No, this is a two-tier justice system. You just had to wait for it to be politically convenient for you to come back and lob these charges. How much time could Alec Baldwin face for involuntary manslaughter? Let's find out. From Vince Rodriguez. First Judicial District Attorney Mary Carmack Altwies and Special Prosecutor Andrea Reeve have announced 2 involuntary manslaughter charges will be filed against actor and producer Alec Baldwin and the movie's armorer Hannah Gutierrez-Reed. In a statement issued by the DA, Baldwin and Gutierrez-Reed will be charged in the alternative. That means the jury would decide not if they were just guilty, but under which definition of involuntary manslaughter they were guilty. The first charge must be proved that there was underlying negligence. New Mexico state laws mark this charge of involuntary manslaughter as 4th-degree felony with up to 18 months in jail and up to a $5,000 fine. The DA says this charge also includes a misdemeanor charge of negligent use of a firearm and could merge together. The second is involuntary in the commission of an unlawful act. This charge must prove there was more than simple negligence involved in the death. The second charge is also punishable by 18 months and $5,000 of fine. This particular charge includes a firearm enhancement, which means there's an added penalty that's mandatory because a firearm was involved. The enhancement includes a mandatory 5 years in jail. So 5 years looks like he must be, and that's mandatory minimum. Will it happen? I'm not sure. All right. from just the news, and actually some good news if you are looking to get into the government work and you live in Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania drops the college degree mandate for state jobs. From Anthony Hennon. In his first executive action since becoming the governor, Josh Shapiro abolished college degree requirements for state job listings in hopes of expanding economic opportunity. That's not why he did it, by the way. I can promise you that's not why he did it. The EO, signed Wednesday, instructs the state to prioritize all skills and experience over credentials for 65,000 positions, according to a press release. Yes, let's get some more people in and taking government money and make it impossible for the private sector to hire them. Because what do you know about government positions? They're all massively overpaid with massive pensions that those in the private sector can't keep up with. Every Pennsylvanian should have the freedom to chart their own course, and I have a real opportunity to succeed, Shapiro said. They should get to decide what's best for them, whether they want to go to college or straight into the workforce, not have that decided for them. The move away from credential requirements comes at a time when Pennsylvania's labor force participation rate continues to fall. One analysis estimates the Commonwealth is missing 113,000 workers. I want to make it clear to all Pennsylvanians whether they went to college or they gained experience through work, job training, or an apprenticeship program. We value your skills and talents and want you to apply for a job at the Commonwealth, Shapiro said. Well, good luck with that. Again, I don't see real benevolent ideas behind this. I see more of, again, a middle finger to the private sector. And on top of that middle finger to the private sector, a way to get more people dependent on the state. All right, a little bit of news. I got 3 articles here pertaining to the same thing, and we'll talk just briefly about all 3 of them. A Georgia trooper is stable after being shot. Protester killed near controversial Cop City police facility site. From Fox 5 Atlanta digital team. A Georgia State Patrol trooper was shot and a protester was killed during a confrontation near the site of the controversial Cop City Atlanta Police Department training facility on Wednesdays, the Georgia Department of Public Safety confirmed. The shooting happened around 9 a.m. Wednesday during a clearing operation at the site. Georgia Department of Public Safety Colonel Chris Wright said at a press conference at Grady Memorial, investigators say law enforcement officers were attempted to get a man out of a tent located at the property. He did not respond to commands given to him to exit, and at some point, Wright said the protester fired a shot. Hitting the trooper, officers returned fire, killing the suspect. Georgia Bureau of Investigation Director Michael Register said a protester opened fire first. An individual without warning shot at a Georgia State Patrol trooper, Register said. Other law enforcement personnel returned fire in self-defense and evacuated the trooper to a safe area. The individual who fired upon law enforcement and shot the trooper was killed in the exchange of gunfire. Other law enforcement officers were able to get the trooper out of the wooded area. Wright said the injured trooper was out of surgery as of Wednesday and in stable condition in the ICU. He was shot in the pelvic area and was wearing a bulletproof vest. Investigators said they found handgun and shell casings at the scene. Officers have not yet released the identity of the trooper or the person killed in the incident. So, my thoughts with the government are as follows. Yes, that should always be something on the front of your mind if you are going in to private property to go back and clear people out. And I do hope that the officer recovers from this. But also, and I've always said, if at some point the federal agents, the police, come back in with a bogus or trumped up warrant to try to get me taken out for whatever reason, and I do have to defend myself with gunfire, I make absolutely no fantasies that I will walk out of that alive. It's not going to be like Rambo where I go out shooting and all the enemies go down, and I still come off without a scratch. Maybe a little bit of blood on one of my arms. It's not going to be like that. If I have to go back and defend myself against the state, 9 times out of 10 I'm going to be deceased. And I don't know, again, the details, because they're not releasing a lot of the details except for the fact that the protester shot first. Whether this was justified, unjustified, or anything else, and nobody else except for the people on site at the time know this. Now they're going to protest like it was unjustified no matter what, obviously. But nobody knows this except for the people who were directly on site at the time, whether or not this was justified or unjustified. Another one from Fox 5. Cop City shooting. GBI releases names of man killed by officers arrested during the sweep. I actually am going to pass over this one just because of privacy of the people that are involved in this. I do want to say, let me look through this. I want to see if there's any detail as to what happened. Georgia Bureau of Investigation says, redacted, Esteban opened fire on a Georgia State Patrol trooper during a clearing operation. Investigators say he did not comply with commands by a joint task force and that he fired first. No other details other than, again, the protester fired first. But the other protesters now call for more. From Fox News, protesters call for violence against police after shooting leaves 1 dead, officers injured. From Lawrence Richard, protesters in Atlanta are calling for violence against police officers and law enforcement entities following a police-involved shooting on Wednesday that left a state trooper wounded and 1 man dead. The Twitter account Scenes from the Atlanta Forest call for a night of rage on Friday to enact a reciprocal violence to be done to the police and their allies. I'm going to tell you right now, and I know what one of the things that protesters like this do is they want to get the body stacked up so they can make a statement against the police, but I'm going to tell you guys right now that you're not pawns, that you actually add value to your community no matter how little your value is. And this is a good way to become deceased. To make a direct threat against the state and then take the fight to them. Did you learn nothing from January 6th and Ashley Babbitt? When you take the fight to the government, you will become deceased. They will kill you. They are better at it than you are. They will kill you and get away with it. If you do the same thing to them, you will be in prison for the rest of your life. Although in Georgia, I believe Georgia has the death penalty. Somebody needs to fact check me on that, but I believe Georgia has the death penalty. So if you kill a police officer in Georgia, the state will kill you back. Consider this a call for reciprocal violence to be done to the police and their allies on Friday, January 20th. Wherever you are, you're invited to participate in a night of rage in order to honor the memory of our fallen comrade, the group wrote on Twitter, in an apparent violation of the platform's terms and conditions. Oh, but don't worry, it's only Evil Parlor that they plan insurrection on. So, well, I'm going to tell you right now, we're probably going to be talking about this on Monday. But we'll watch and see. And the last one before we do things I like and things that I hate. Because this one didn't fit into either one of them. Facebook and Instagram may lift ban on bare breast, but only for trans and non-binary. From Ariel Zilber. Facebook and Instagram may allow transgender and non-binary users to flash their bare breasts, but women who are born female who are eager to free the nipple are out of luck, according to Meta's advisory board. Why? Because of course they are. Meta's Oversight Board, an independent body of experts, which Meta CEO Mark Zuckerberg has called the company's Supreme Court for Content Moderation and Censorship, ordered Facebook and Instagram to lift a ban on images of topless women for anyone who identifies as transgender or non-binary, meaning they view themselves as neither male nor female. The same image of female-presenting nipples would be prohibited if posted by cisgender women, but permitted if posted by an individual self-identifying as non-binary, the board noted in its decision. This is clown world, yo. And really honestly, it shouldn't be a huge deal. I would say that you would probably need to raise the age of entry to Facebook to 18, if that really was going to be the case, because there are going to be little 13-year-olds that are just going on there looking for boobs, especially at a time when a lot of the boys are discovering themselves. They don't care what the Zer that's attached to the boobs calls itself. They just want to see boobs. But this is complete and utter clown world at this point. So, that's where we're at for that. Alright, let's do a few things I like and a couple things that I hate. And we'll head out of here for the day. The thing that I like. Thief tries to steal St. Michael the Archangel statue from church, then karma strikes with great vengeance, from Paul Saka. A would-be robber nearly pulled off the theft of the St. Michael the Archangel statue from church in New Mexico, regular Mexico, not New Mexico. However, the pilfering was thwarted by one consequential misstep by the thief. During the early hours of January 14th, a man broke into the Christ the King parish in Monterrey, Mexico, approximately 150 miles from the border with Texas. Carlos Alonso, 32, reportedly hopped over a fence, smashed a glass door, and broke into the Christ the King parish. The man tried to steal a statue of St. Michael the Archangel. According to local reports, the thief was drunk off his behind during the attempted robbery. While attempting to steal the holy statue, Alonso allegedly tripped and fell on top of the St. Michael's sword. During the stumble, the man seriously injured his neck. ABC Noticias said the tip of the Archangel's sword pricked the neck of the alleged 32-year-old thief. The Mexican media outlet called the thief's karmic self-sabotage a matter of divine justice. A passerby witnessed the severely injured man clutching his neck at the church and called for emergency medical help. The Catholic News Agency reported Monterrey Civil Protection personnel arrived at the scene, cut the padlock on the main gate, and saved the would-be thief's life. Now, of course, if the dude had died, we'd be saying a very different story, but he lived. So I can say that the karma's there. God issued a warning, and he does that from time to time. I'll admit, when I had my little kitchen fire, I think that was God throwing one across the bow to remind me, hey, you probably shouldn't be hitting on a married chick. And that changed my behavior in a hurry. And I bet you this guy recovers and rethinks his life. I hope he does, at least, anyway. That would be some good news coming out of that. And again, obviously, this would not be on things that I like. It probably wouldn't even be on things that I hate if he had died. I don't know if I would have even covered it if he died, but since he lived, I can make fun of him, but also hope that he rethinks his life. Alright, thing that I like number 2. Bill to adjust Oregon and Idaho border introduced in Oregon Senate. From KGW staff. An Oregon state senator has introduced a bill advancing the cause of the so-called Greater Idaho movement, which seeks to adjust the state lines to move several conservative-leaning eastern counties out of Oregon, arguing that Idaho would be a better political fit for them. If passed, SJM 2 wouldn't make changes on its own. It's written as a memorandum inviting Idaho political leaders to talk about the idea, but the bill's chances of going anywhere in Oregon's Democrat-controlled state legislature are slim. Oregon's 2023 legislative session doesn't officially begin until January 17th, but SJM 2 was one of several pre-session bills introduced this week after lawmakers gathered on Monday to be sworn in. The chief sponsor is State Senator Dennis Linthicum of Klamath Falls. The bill states that voting patterns of eastern Oregon have for many decades resembled voting patterns of Idaho. Echoing a common argument from the Greater Idaho movement, it states that 15 Oregon counties might vote on this issue and that 11 of them have already done so. Those 15 counties are not named in the bill, but the Greater Idaho movement's website separately lists them as Klamath, Lake, Harney, Malheur, Baker, Grant, Union, Wheeler, Morrow, Sherman, Jefferson, Wallowa, Umatilla, Gilliam, and Crook counties. The first 11 counties on that list have indeed all voted to approve symbolic ballot measures expressing support for the Greater Idaho Plan, mostly Morrow County and Wheeler County in November. Wallowa County voters rejected a Greater Idaho ballot measure in 2020, although the movement claimed a separate news release Tuesday to have gathered enough signatures for an attempt in May. Douglas, Josephine, and Klamath counties have also voted in Greater Idaho ballot measures. Recently, the movement's Phase 2 goal is to add Southwest Oregon and part of Northern California to Idaho, but only the Klamath measure has passed, the Oregonian reported. And that's good. It really is. If you're not being represented by your government, but you've got a long history into where you live. Now, obviously, first thing you should do is attempt to see if you can make a similar to better life for yourself somewhere else, and move yourself and move with your feet and show the government that they need to shape up. Otherwise, they're not going to get your tax revenue. But especially with a lot of the land that's over there in that Oregonian area, that's, they picked it up, they're doing great things with it in a very fertile area, but they're just not represented by Portland, essentially. Your second choice would obviously see if you can change the map a little bit and make yourself into a different state, or join yourself into a different state, for that matter. I hope they succeed. I really do. I don't, again, just like the article said, I don't think there's a lot of chance of that, but I hope they succeed. I really do. And the last one also comes from The Blaze. God is real. Bills quarterback describes spiritual awakening since teammates' on-field collapse. From Courtney Wheel. After Bills safety Damar Hamlin went into cardiac arrest during the Bills' January 2nd matchup against the Bengals, people all over the world bowed their heads in solemn prayer for his life and health. While the offer of thoughts and prayers for a frightening situation is commonplace, those thoughts and prayers seem to have taken root in this instance. Hamlin's teammate, quarterback Josh Allen, opened up about a spiritual awakening that has occurred in his team's locker room and in his own heart since the incident. Allen, 26, makes a regular appearance with the NFL Network co-host Kyle Brandt on the podcast Kyle Brandt's Basement, and on the January 10th episode, the two discussed Hamlin's continued recovery and God's role in it. I said this in my press conference the other day. Allen told Brandt, there was just kind of a spiritual awakening, really for me and for a lot of other people, that maybe didn't have the strongest beliefs or wasn't one of the biggest, strongest Christian followers. I want to see if, by the way, this is queued up. It is not. So we won't go on to the queuing for that. The spiritual awakening is not surprising considering the severity of Hamlin's medical crisis. Not only did first responders and training staff perform CPR on Hamlin right there on the field, but his uncle Dorian Glenn later reported that Hamlin had to be resuscitated twice in the minutes and hours that followed his collapse. But despite the precariousness of his health that night, Hamlin has since made a remarkable recovery. He was discharged from the hospital within a week and is now recuperating in Buffalo. A lot of things can be true at once in this. Yes, I still believe, obviously, not believe, because this is a YouTube video, but I still believe that there was a certain medical procedure that was involved in this. But again, just like I said with several other things, that doesn't mean I want the dude to die. I want him to live a full and healthy life. I really do. And I hope that he does. And God looked at this and saw that it was not his time and gave him back to us. Twice, apparently. And if this can do another spiritual awakening in an industry and league that's, let's face it, not always very spiritual, that's a good thing. That's a good thing. But that is what we have for that. Now for a couple things that I hate. From the New York Post. I found this on Sunday. I put this on the stack. And I can't believe I have to say these words. 17-year-old scolded for crying over transgender woman's penis at YMCA. From Dana Kennedy. A California teen cried as she recalled seeing a naked man at her local YMCA, telling the city council in her San Diego suburb she'd been traumatized by the experience with a person she described as a trans woman. Rebecca Phillips, 17, said that she was changing after swimming one day last month at the Santee YMCA when she spotted a naked trans woman in the changing rooms. As I was showering after my workout, I saw a naked male in the women's locker room, she told Santee City Council. I immediately went back to the shower, terrified, and then hid behind their flimsy excuse for a curtain until he was gone. Phillips said the policy of allowing trans women in the female locker room should be changed, adding that she was especially worried her 5-year-old sister could be exposed to a naked trans woman at the YMCA, the Daily Mail reported. This is the YMCA where hundreds of children spend their summer afternoons in childcare camps, Phillips added. This is the YMCA where my little sister took gymnastics lessons. The locker room was supposed to be her safe haven to gossip with her friends and shower and change. Phillips said she was reprimanded by YMCA staffers who told her the trans woman had every right to be in the female changing room, the Daily Mail said. Women's facilities may be used by anyone in California now that the state law says people must be allowed to use facilities that align with their gender identity. Phillips told the council she was very upset by the experience, but when she brought up the issue to YMCA management, she was told, "The man I saw was indeed allowed to shower wherever he pleased." A grown male can shower alongside a teenage girl at your YMCA here in Santee. Phillips said that she was shamed by the YMCA. So, it's not just the fact, by the way, at all, that this is somebody who had to see a naked man in a locker room where she was supposed to feel safe. And also knowing that her younger, more defenseless sister could possibly be in the same locker room. It's the fact that they denigrated her for that, on top of it. They told her she was wrong and possibly evil for thinking that this was not a normal thing to see. And that's disgusting. And that's, the logical end of everything that we're seeing here. It really is. And I hate this. Although one silver lining that I can come to with this as we get ready to go off and take care of this is that, and I don't know where Santee is, by the way. I'm actually going to look and see where Santee, California is. Looks like this is East LA area, San Diego. Oh, not even LA. That's close to the Mexican border. I saw San Diego, and I guess I thought that was closer to LA than I thought it was. So, from what I understand, San Diego is kind of based, regardless. But this is San Diego area. somewhat close to Los Angeles when you compare versus San Francisco, perhaps. But I can tell you right off the bat that this is probably, at this point, somebody who is, she's 17 now. Within a year, she's going to be 18, and whether it be when she turns 18 or when she graduates high school, I'm willing to bet that there's a one-way ticket in order to get her out of California. And I bet she does that on her own volition, too. I'd be willing to put some money that after an experience like that, and then having Santee tell her she was so wrong, she gone. And also, for things that I hate, and what'll close out the show today, Wednesday's renewed for season 2. That's good, I like that. I like the first season. But now, it's time to hire more Black and Latine writers. Yeah, they got sick of us making fun of them for Latinx. Latinx. So now it's Latine. From Rebecca Radio. Okay, one of the main titular characters of your series is Hispanic. In fact, I believe Jenna Ortega, Ortega, that's a Spanish name too, made waves in 2022 for being the first Latina to portray Wednesday Addams. Even though her father Gomez has been a Latino since the 60s television show. Was he? I thought he was Italian. I don't know. After a brief period where Wednesday fans were concerned it wouldn't get picked up for season 2, Netflix announced that the beloved Addams Family adjacent series would make a comeback. After being the most watched show on Netflix for 6 weeks straight, it would have been a serious misstep not to renew Wednesday. The show's massive impact and overall success with both critics and fans does well to highlight the show's star, Jenna Ortega. The actress made waves in 2022 for being the first Latina to portray Wednesday, even though her father, Gomez, has been a Latino since the 60s. While Wednesday was a huge step forward in recognizing the character's ethnicity, the show still faltered when it came to representing other characters of color. Dude, there's not a quota. Find the best actors to fit the characters that you want. Although I will give Netflix props that they're not color washing current characters, they're actually making new characters. Other than the Addamses themselves, Bianca Barclay, Sunday Joy, and Lucas Walker, Iman Marson were among the characters of color in Wednesday, and the most prominent black characters to boot. Knowing Burton's other projects have a history of not representing characters of color at all, Wednesday feels like a triumph. Look, I'm willing to give season 2 a chance. Don't ruin it by being woke. Seriously. You had a good thing in a well-known franchise, in a situation where I typically say stop using old characters and make something new, where I actually said, no, this actually fits within the timeline and the characters involved. You won me over on this. Don't screw it up. So yes, they're gonna color wash the rest of Wednesday. This world is going to hell, folks. It really is. And Quest Fanning is here right at the end, at the tail end, which means he'll probably spend the next hour catching back up. But I'll already be off by that point. Especially since my sister called, and if my sister called, there's something serious going on here, so I'm actually going to have to go make that call back here in just a moment. But with that, we're out of here. Yeah, my sister doesn't call at all. All right, well, thank you everybody who came by, chatted, and hung out in the live chat and got us going here. I know that Grant was not particularly pleased about the Crowder talk, but, again, that is something that I think that we did have to talk about, especially with what was going off there. Mazel tov to Luke Weave for getting his hazmat, by the way. We'll be back here tomorrow with more news, more headlines, and more contemporary, and a little bit of live chat as well. So I will be recording the names of everybody who chatted in the live chat in this notebook right here and saying thank you to everybody using the aggregator from Restream's internal program. So come back in and hang out with me for that. That's always a fun time and a chance for me to get back to the viewers. And I will also be reading some, if not all, of your live chats as well. So come back and join me for that. And if you've got something that you want to get on air, and it is family friendly enough for the AM radio, we get a little bit of spice, but if it is family friendly enough for the AM radio, we'll even get you read on the air as well. So come back and join us for that. It'll be a good time. We'll probably be talking about the debt ceiling crisis. I don't think we'll be talking about Crowder much anymore unless something else big drops off that. Possibly some Davos stuff, because I know that's big in the news, and a host of more things over here on Contemporary. We will see you then. If you're on the Twitch side, stick around. We will go find someone to rate on that side, and we will see you next time on Contemporary. And until then, I am Jay Edgar, and this is Contemporary.